There's a quiet trap that nobody warns you about. The more you let people in, the more you risk losing yourself. You think closeness means transparency. You think love means no walls. But somewhere past 65, if you've paid any attention at all, you start to understand that sharing everything isn't generosity. Sometimes it's the beginning of losing your own life. My name is Dorothy. I'm 81 years old, and for most of my life, I believed that openness was the highest form of love. I told my family everything, not out of recklessness, but out of genuine trust. I thought honesty built bridges. What I didn't understand until much later is that some bridges, once built, can't be unbuilt. And some truths, once spoken, take root in rooms you no longer control. So today I want to sit with you, not preach, not instruct, just talk honestly about 5 things I've come to believe are better kept to yourself after 65. Not because we're hiding, not because we've become cold or distant, but because protecting your peace in this season of life isn't selfishness, it's survival. Let's begin with the one that surprised me most: the precise details of your money. We come from a generation that valued straight talk, no guessing games, no surprises. So it feels almost irresponsible not to lay everything out clearly for the people we love. We think, if they just understand the numbers, they'll worry less. What we don't realize is that the moment you hand someone a clear picture of your financial life, you hand them something else entirely, a quiet claim to it. I knew a woman, 77 years old, who'd spent 4 decades making careful, deliberate financial decisions. She raised her children, buried a husband, built a modest but meaningful security for herself. One spring afternoon, she invited her 3 adult children to dinner and walked them through everything: the savings accounts, the pension, the property, the intentions she had for all of it. She brought printed sheets. She answered every question. She thought it was one of the most loving things she'd ever done. Within 3 months, her life had changed in ways she hadn't expected. Her oldest began calling weekly with suggestions about the house. Wasn't it getting too big to manage? Shouldn't she consider downsizing before values dropped? Her middle child expressed surprise that she was planning an international trip. Shouldn't that money go somewhere more practical? The youngest, who'd always kept his distance, suddenly appeared interested in Sunday dinners. Very interested. None of it was cruel. All of it was wrapped in care. But she told me later, with tears she tried to hold back, that she no longer felt like a woman managing her own life. She felt like an asset being monitored. That's what happens when the curtain goes up too early. The people who love you begin making quiet calculations, not out of greed necessarily, but because human beings, even good ones, adjust their behavior when money enters the conversation. Distance collapses. Opinions multiply. Decisions that were once yours alone suddenly feel collaborative, whether you invited collaboration or not. You should absolutely have a will. A trusted person with legal authority to act on your behalf when the time comes. An accountant who understands your situation. These are not optional. But your children don't need a quarterly report. Your grandchildren don't need to know the balance. The cousin who never visited doesn't need to understand your estate plan. Privacy in financial matters isn't cruelty, it is dignity. Every dollar you have represents years of decisions made before anyone else was part of the picture. You earned the right to spend it, save it, give it, or hold it as you see fit, without forming a committee to justify every choice. No one who hasn't walked your road has the standing to second-guess how you walk it now. The second thing? Your everyday health complaints. There is something deeply human about wanting to share when our bodies remind us that we are aging. A stiff hip in the morning, the sleep that doesn't quite arrive, the small pains that weren't there 10 years ago. These feel like ordinary updates, like weather reports from inside our own skin. But here is what we don't anticipate. To the people who love us, these words don't land like small talk. They land like warnings. I once watched a friend of mine, 74, strong-willed, endlessly active, a woman who walked 5 kilometers every morning and still kept a garden the size of a small farm, unintentionally restructure her relationship with her children in about 48 hours. All she did was mention, casually, over the phone, that she'd had some lower back tightness after a long week of planting. Just that, a passing observation. By the next morning, her daughter had called twice and suggested she speak to a specialist. By the end of the week, there were conversations about whether she should continue driving on the highway. By the following month, her daughter had begun asking, before every visit, whether there was anything she needed handled. What was once independence began feeling like supervision. My friend hadn't changed, but the story her family was telling about her had. This is the invisible cost of oversharing minor health details. Not that anyone means harm, quite the opposite. The love is real, the concern is genuine, but the effect is often a slow reclassification. You move, in their minds, from capable and autonomous to fragile and in need of management. And once that shift happens in someone's mental picture of you, it is very hard to reverse. Of course, significant health changes deserve to be shared. A diagnosis, a condition requiring medication or support, something that genuinely affects how you move through the world. Your family deserves to know these things, and you deserve the help they can offer. But every sore knee, every restless night, every passing headache does not require an audience. You have lived in your body long enough to know the difference between what is aging and what is alarming. Trust that knowledge. There is also this: the more we speak about what aches, the more that becomes the shape of our identity in conversation. We become the sum of our complaints, and that is not who we are. We are people with full inner lives, passions, memories, opinions, curiosity. We are more than our body's slow announcements. Don't let the small discomforts narrate your story for you. Now let's talk about family conflict and why stepping in is almost never as helpful as it seems. At this point in life, most of us have watched family drama cycle through its patterns enough times to feel confident we could navigate it. We've seen which arguments are real and which are seasonal. We've watched children fight and reconcile. We've seen misunderstandings between in-laws stretch into years of cold politeness. We feel qualified to help, and that instinct, I want to say clearly, comes from a beautiful place. But experience has a second lesson that takes longer to arrive. The more fluent you are in the language of a family's history, the more dangerous your words become inside its conflicts. Because everyone hears you not just as a person speaking, but as a symbol. You represent something. And when you enter a dispute, even softly, even neutrally, you carry all of that symbolism in with you. A woman I know, 78, widely regarded as the steady emotional anchor of her family, made one remark during a tense afternoon. A quiet observation about her grandson's behavior, offered gently, with no edge to it whatsoever. She wasn't taking sides. She was barely even involved. Her daughter heard it as criticism. The relationship cooled. Visits thinned. What had been warm became careful. Years passed. It never fully returned to what it was. One sentence. One sentence offered in good faith, and the cost was measured in years. This is the thing about families in conflict. They are not looking for a judge. They are not really looking for wisdom. They are looking for an ally. And if you are not clearly on their side, you are at risk of being quietly placed on the other one. Your intention is irrelevant to that process. What matters is how your words get absorbed through the emotional pressure already in the room. So what do? You can love people without entering their battles. You can be genuinely available without making yourself the mediator. The most useful position you can hold, the one that costs you the least and preserves the most, is quiet presence. A steady warmth that doesn't take sides, doesn't volunteer analysis, doesn't insert itself where it wasn't clearly invited. There is power in saying, softly, that you believe in their ability to work it through, that you are there if they need you, and then actually stepping back. That is not detachment. That is the wisdom of someone who has watched enough arguments resolve themselves to know that most of them do, given time and space, and far fewer resolve because a third party stepped in with perspective. Your peace is not a luxury. Your calm is not indifference. It is the gift of someone who has learned when to speak and when to hold still. The fourth thing, and this one is subtle, is your regrets. Everyone our age carries them. The trip never taken. The choice made in a moment of fear that we'd undo if we could. The version of a life that flickered briefly as a possibility and then closed. These are real, and they deserve to exist. They are part of the texture of a life fully lived. But they are, I have come to believe, largely meant to be held privately. I think about a woman I used to correspond with, 76, a retired librarian who'd given her most devoted years to a family that needed her completely. One afternoon on a walk with her daughter, she let herself speak a quiet thought aloud. Something about wishing she'd traveled more when she was younger. A passing reflection. She wasn't complaining. She was being honest about a feeling she'd carried for a long time. Her daughter carried it too, afterward, but differently. She told her mother later, with great pain, that hearing those words made her feel like the life they'd built together, the sacrifices her mother had made, the years of love and presence, had somehow not been worth it. That her family was the thing that had stood between her mother and real happiness. That was never what she meant, but that is what was heard. When we share regrets with the people we love, they do not always receive them as the honest, universal, human observations we intend. They receive them as commentary on the life they were part of. When you say you wish you had chosen a different path, they wonder if that path led away from them. When you say you should have spent your energy differently, they hear that the energy you spent on them was misdirected. You cannot control how your words land, but you can choose which ones you release. This isn't about performing cheerfulness or erasing a complex past. It's about recognizing that some reflections belong to you alone. They are not secrets, they are sacred. And the most honest thing you can do is honor them privately and offer the people around you the story of someone who has grown from everything, including the parts that didn't go as hoped. Instead of speaking the regret, you can carry the lesson. Instead of sharing the wound, you can offer the wisdom it produced. That is not dishonesty. That is the particular grace of someone who has loved deeply enough to protect others from their own inner weather. And finally, the fifth thing, the one most people assume is generous to share. Your plans for what you leave behind. The logic seems straightforward. Tell everyone in advance. Avoid confusion. Prevent arguments. Give people time to adjust their expectations. And there is something to it in the abstract. Legal clarity matters. A well-drafted will, executed with care and witnessed properly, is one of the most responsible things you can do for the people you love. But there is a distinction between having a clear legal plan and turning your estate into a topic of family conversation. And that distinction in practice changes everything. A woman I know, 83, a retired nurse who'd lived with the kind of quiet financial discipline that only comes from decades of intentional choices, decided one year to be completely transparent with her 4 adult children. She sat them down separately and told each one exactly what to expect, which accounts, what the property would likely yield, which personal items would go to whom. She thought she was giving them peace of mind. What she gave them instead was a new framework for seeing her. Her eldest son, who'd been reliably relaxed about everything, began calling her with opinions about real estate markets and optimal selling windows. Her youngest daughter, who lived far away, raised questions about whether the division was truly equitable, given her particular circumstances. Her son, who'd always been the quietest, simply went distant, wounded in a way he couldn't quite name. She told me she began to feel, sitting in her own kitchen, that she had become secondary in her own story. The house, the accounts, the plan had become the main characters. She was just the person managing the timeline. This is what premature disclosure of asset plans almost always produces. Not peace, not gratitude. Competition. Comparison. The quiet arithmetic of who is getting what relative to whom, and whether it is fair, and whether your choices reflect how much you truly love each person. These questions are unanswerable and endless, and once you've opened that door, it is very difficult to close. You owe no one a preview. You owe no one a justification for decisions that belong entirely to you. What you choose to do with the resources you built over a lifetime reflects your values, your relationships, your history, your love, expressed in your own terms. That is private. That is yours. The moment you share the details, some people who love you will begin to see your life choices through a different lens. They will wonder why you're spending money on a vacation if the estate will eventually be split. They will quietly recalculate. The pressure won't always be spoken. It will live in glances, in hesitations, in the way a conversation changes when you mention a purchase. And that pressure will slowly wear away at the thing you've worked so hard to build, your freedom. Keep the plan legally sound. Update it as your life changes. Trust the person you've designated to carry it out, but do not hold press conferences about it. Do not treat your retirement years as an ongoing negotiation over what comes next. Live them. Spend them as you choose. Your legacy is not a number. It is not a distribution schedule. It is the quality of presence you offered to the people around you across an entire lifetime. That is what will remain long after any account is closed. So let me leave you with this. You've spent decades in service to others. Not just the practical service, the cooking and the showing up and the financial sacrifice and the emotional labor, but the deeper service of making yourself available, of remaining open, of being someone others could rely on. That was generous. That mattered. But there is a kind of generosity that only becomes possible later in life, when you've accumulated enough wisdom to see what you actually need to protect. The generosity of knowing when not to speak, of understanding that your peace is not a passive thing that simply arrives, but an active thing you choose to guard, one conversation at a time. Some truths are worth sharing, some are worth holding close. Not because you've grown cold, not because the love has diminished, but because you've finally understood that your inner life belongs to you, and protecting it is not selfishness. It is wisdom hard-earned over many decades of giving everything. I remember a summer years ago when I thought the only way to be loved was to be completely known. I believed that holding anything back was a kind of betrayal. I've lived long enough now to know how wrong that was. Some things were always meant to stay mine. Some spaces were always meant to remain quiet. And the people who truly love you will not need access to every room. You've lived through enough conversations to know what happens when you share too freely. You've felt the weight of having said too much. You've watched concern curdle into control, and openness turn into something that cost you more than it gave. You don't have to keep making that trade. What you protect now, your dignity, your autonomy, your right to make choices without a panel of well-meaning judges, that is not a wall. It is a foundation. The foundation of a life lived fully, on your own terms, until the very end. If this landed somewhere real for you today, I hope you'll subscribe to this channel, because these conversations are meant to keep going. And I'd love to know, is there something you wish you'd kept to yourself sooner? Leave it in the comments below. You'd be surprised how many others are carrying the exact same thought. Take care of your peace. You've earned it more than you know.